Well, I come from Burma, now known as Myanmar, and I'm a poet, translator, editor, and English language teacher in my country. You know, Burmese names have meanings. Zeyar means success, and LYNN means light. So Zeyar LYNN means it's like a person who will bring um, light and success to the people or whatever. So I purposely chose that name, Zeyar LYNN,
That's
the
right.
light bringer, the light giver. Well, the best thing is that, you know, in our country, um, because I think because the progress and development has been rather slow, literature takes plays a very prominent role in our culture, and and the readers give us the writers and poets that readership that we need to survive, and so there is this very healthy reciprocal relationship between writers, poets, and the readers, and as a writer, as a poet myself, I take it as my responsibility to give a voice to the voiceless, or to be a voice for the voiceless, and to keep up this spirit of, you know, simple human dignity in the face of oppression. So the people consider or regard writers very highly, and writers do try to live up to that respect. So I think that's what's good about writing in Burma, because we not only get that esteem, we also have to earn that esteem through our responsibility. So although we do not have the strict poetry for people's sake or literature for people's sake anymore, we still sort of adhere to that principle that one writes for the people. The worst would be, well, of course, um, having to live under military regime for half a century, and you know, during when we didn't enjoy any freedom of expression, no human rights, but in a way, I think it was that lack of freedom of expression that motivated us to, you know, to write, to say what we want to say. Although this um, period of censorship was really realistically terrible for us, it also pushed us in a way. So I think the worst was part of the good things.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's my homeland, and um, I would say the best thing about my country is the spirit of the people. You know, like I said, they went through nearly 50 years of brutal repression, and we were, you know, so isolated from the world. We didn't know what was happening in the world, and when I was attending college, all university students, both boys and girls, wore um, um, army shirts because they were very cheap, and you know, at that time there was no um, consumerism like today, and people didn't have any clothes to wear. There were no shopping malls, so you know, if you go to the university, you will see all university students wearing this army shirts and army bags. But um, later on, when the army was really um, brutal in suppressing this '88 revolution, the people turned against the army. uh, but they didn't. The people never gave up on this hope for freedom and democracy, and um, at one time it came to a point when people were not afraid of the military anymore. Even on buses, you would hear people having a conversation about how many years this person's husband is in prison and how many years this person's son is in prison, and everyone would hear it and nobody would care because it was like, something ordinary. So, and then another thing was, of course, we could not say anything against the military government directly. And what was not said was heard loudly by everyone. And then, there was this love for Aung San Suu Kyi. Although a person having in possession a photograph of Aung San Suu Kyi could be sent to prison for 20 years, we still kept her photographs, her pictures at home. See, so I think it was that spirit, living in, we didn't live in terror that much because at that point we just didn't care whether we would go to prison or not because we considered that the whole country was already in prison. So I think the best thing about my country is the people and their spirit that has now sort of paved the way for Aung San Suu Kyi to carry on the democratization process. As a leftist-leaning person, I have this sense that whatever I have must be for the support of the people. So, luckily, having had this English language proficiency that most people don't have, I felt it my duty to translate poems, articles on poetry, poetics into the Burmese poetry world, so that the poetry world would, widen itself, broaden itself. There would be more space within that restricted circle. So, so I translated the early modernists, and then of course these so-called postmodernists, confessionalists like Sylvia Plath, Ashbery, and people up to the present moment. So I think the main reason that pushed me to translate these was, and also being a language teacher, that spirit of wanting to educate people, not wanting to be the teacher or the guru, but to, educate, to empower people to know more. Right now, I've been translating a poem by Dean Young, who was once an alumni of this Iowa Writers Workshop, I think. And I have, Dean Young has got my fancy because his poems, the way he structures his poems, are very close to Ashbery's poems. So, there's this strain of French surrealism and a lot of disjunctive procedures and, non sequiturs, which may not make sense, but which are very interesting to read. So, I'm translating them because most Myanmar mainstream poems are very linearly structured. The first line goes progressively to the last line, which ends in an epiphany, and that I would call it some old-fashioned lyric mode. So I'm translating this Dean Young's way of writing poems to make my fellow poets think about structuring poems. As I said, our mainstream Burmese poetry is very much that eye-based, emotion, expression coming first, very expressivist, and to use the phrases used by Charles Bernstein, the poems come in a tone lock, with just one tone, and there's no variation. And then to use Charles Altieri's phrase, most Myanmar mainstream poems were, like scenic. They presented a scene and then ended with the message, so-called message. And, after having read poems by the post-Soviet Russian poets, the materialists, the polystylists, the conceptualists, people like Pragov, then people like Pashchikov, Dragomoshenko, I found that, they were writing poetry in new ways. Although they were living in the same conditions, like in Burma, in Myanmar, they were striking out the new directions, and I translated them. And there were 7 articles called, which I called post-Soviet Russian poetry scene. And that caused a lot of stir because 90% of poets are left-leaning, if not, totally leftist. And they were amazed that, these poets in the Soviet Union, Marxists, were writing in that sort of, mode that most people would not understand. So it hit against this policy of writing for the people's sake, writing for people to understand. So that was a shock. And then when I introduced language poetry, of course, that was like dropping a bomb on them. And up to now, they still hate me because it shocked all the poets in the country. And I think that was the first time they realized that there was such a thing called language. So, and I also used the techniques and strategies used by language poets such as Ron Silliman, Barrett Wharton, Bob Perelman, Charles Bernstein, LYNN. I studied them very carefully, very deeply. I took notes on the way they would structure their poems, how they would juxtapose their lines, and I wrote Burmese poems according to those techniques or strategies. And the first thing those people in my country, the first thing they said was, this is not poetry, this is chopped up prose. Then the second thing they said was, this is some kind of schizophrenic writing. No sane person would write like this. And the third thing they said was, language was created by people to write poetry. And that's not true. Because we have language, we write poetry. Poetry did not come first. So I brought in this constructivist ideas of poetry into the Myanmar poetry world, and I also make use of those techniques and strategies, those ways of organizing. So I'm quite happy to say that I've had started from a coterie of poets. I've had this younger generation poets who are moving on. Yeah. And because they also have this command of English, they are having direct contact with people like Nada Gordon and other fluff writers, and they are even exchanging their poems. So I think this stream of language-based poetry is one important stream in our current contemporary Myanmar poetry. Well, I wish I could, but I don't have the time because I teach from 10 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. 6 days a week. I teach 6 days a week from 10 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., which means the only reading time I have is late at night when I get home and have my dinner. Usually I start reading at about 10, 11 till 2 a.m. And then I have my free Fridays. I read and I write on Fridays, and that's why all my writings are dated, and if you look at the dates, all are on Fridays because I write only on Fridays. So I don't have the time to read fiction. So whatever little time I have to spend it on poetry. Well, speaking of my country, I don't think our government has um, any thought about supporting the literati financially. Maybe because one thing is um, the government doesn't have that money, and another thing is um, the Burmese government or the Myanmar government, starting from the first government in 1948 up to now, we have had three successive governments, and now this is the fourth. And all these four governments of our country feel threatened by literature because, um, um, like Brodsky said, literature speaks truth to power, and they can't bear to hear the truth. So governments have successively repressed writers and poets. So I don't think they are in any position to, or they have any volition to support the writers financially. And in a way, I feel that it's a good thing for writers and poets like me, like us, because if we were financially supported, that support will not come free. It will come with strings attached, with conditions we have to comply with, and without knowing, we might even become the organs of the government. We might even have to be the propagandists, or we might be used as propaganda. So in a way, uh, I wouldn't want that support, and I don't think the government will support us either. The biggest surprise has been the federal government shut down. And wow, it amazed me so much because how can this happen to America, in America, the country we idealize? And then it occurred to me that it can happen only in America and not in any country throughout the world. And that's what makes America America. So, yeah, that was really strange. And I traveled to New York, San Francisco, then and I talked with people there, Americans. I asked them about this shutdown, and although they expressed their negative feelings about it, they didn't show any uh, any sense of like danger to them, or a disaster. It was like like somebody said, it happened 17 years back, and he said this will pass. It won't take long, and that was another strange thing that I noticed, because if anything were to happen, something like that in my country, all the people would be so interested, and there would be such a chaos throughout the country. But here, there was no such thing. It was like business as usual, although the government had shut down, and so that was the biggest thing that has amazed me in America. As for Iowa City, I find it very quiet, homely, compared to Yangon. Yangon is so noisy, boisterous, chaotic. Maybe because of the size, population. There are 5 million inhabitants in Yangon compared with compared with Iowa City. Um, um, being so used to um, having this idea of America being hustling and bustling, Iowa City is so quiet, and maybe that's what I like about Iowa City. Its quietness. So I've been to San Francisco. I've been in New York. Um, compared to, New York, San Francisco, or even London for that matter, this is such a homely place. It's like coming back home. And um, during these 2.5 months that I've been here, that quietness, that peacefulness has um, given me a lot of tranquility in my mind, to write things. So if I were to come back to Iowa City again, I wouldn't mind at all. Yeah. Um, Now, I have something very small against the IWP. You know, before coming to Iowa City, I had hoped to have a deeper understanding of the state of literature in the different countries from the different participants. But all we had was 30 minutes. 15 minutes in either Prairie Lights or Shama House to do the readings, and 15 minutes in the International Literature Today program. So we didn't have much time to talk about uh, the, the history or the current situation of literature in our country and how we situate our own works within the contemporary literary situation. So I wasn't able to talk about that, and I didn't hear it from other participants either. I wish IWC had, IWB has given us at least 1 to 2 hours per participant. Now there are 35 participants here, okay, and our stay in Iowa City itself is about 60 days, I would say, okay, which means we could have had at least 2 participants per day talking about his or her uh, literary culture at length, and that would give us a lot of background ideas, and it would also, uh, you know, help me to situate my own writing and its formal properties uh, as being more related to this person's poetics or that person's poetics. But now it was like that I feel that there's vacuum, and although I heard the works of the participants, which I enjoyed very much, and from which I've learned a lot, I still don't know where they are and who they are vis-a-vis their culture, their literary culture. So I wish that I could have, that the audience, the audience, uh, would have asked me those deeper questions of my place in my society. See, because that will give people a better idea of like why I'm here and why not another poet, or or how I've come to be in this position, in terms of the the mainstream, in terms of the avant-garde tendencies, in terms of where poetry is right now in my country. So that's what I had hoped for. That's what I wish for. Yeah. Now, what suddenly comes to my mind is Paul Engel. And before I heard about IWB, of course, I knew nothing about Paul Engel, never heard of him. Then last year, when Pandora came back and talked about Iowa, that was the first time I heard about Paul Engel. And, you know, I, in my mind, I see him as a visionary. And I think what he envisioned is now being um, successfully applied by the IWP. And um, if if I had not been chosen to represent my country to come here during this residency, I wouldn't have met people like Ali, Nada, Dimitri, Kim, Mark, all those nice people. Um, we we not only learned this literature from each other, but also, you know, things that were not expressed explicitly, but we sort of just took in people's little behaviors and little their ways of thinking, and with some people, I've become really close to them, whereas with others, I still feel distance. But anyway, I really thank the IWP for for making Paul Engel's vision real, and um, and last words. I thank IWP very much, and I wish IWP all future success. We also have to earn that esteem through our responsibility. So, although we do not have the strict poetry for people's sake or literature for people's sake anymore, we still sort of adhere to that principle that one writes for the people. The worst would be, well, of course, having to live under military regime for half a century. Zeyar means success, and LYNN means light. So Zeyar LYNN means it's like a person who will bring light and success to the people or whatever. So I purposely chose that name, Zeyar LYNN, the light bringer, the light giver. Well, the best thing is that, in our country, um, because I think, because the well, I come from Burma, now known as Myanmar, and I'm a poet, translator, editor, and English language teacher in my country. Burmese names have meanings. Progress and development has been rather slow. Literature plays a very prominent role in our culture, and the readers give us the writers and poets that readership that we need to survive, and so there is this very healthy reciprocal relationship between writers, poets, and the readers. And as a writer, as a poet myself, I take it as my responsibility to give a voice to the voiceless, or to be a voice for the voiceless, and to keep up this spirit of simple human dignity in the face of oppression. So the people consider or regard writers very highly, and writers do try to live up to that respect. So I think that's what's good about writing in Burma, because we not only get that esteem,